Who's the richest? The one question that controls the world. Humanity has been asking this question since the ancient days. To this day, kingdoms rise and fall for the sole purpose of becoming richer than one another. Look, money isn't everything, and political and religious ideology often play a part as well. But things like wars, famines, and forced labor never happen without any monetary incentives. Today, with public data and statistics, we can actually answer this question. So this is the history of the richest countries in the world.
China's GDP growth in Q2 hit 6.2%, the lowest on record.
Its fastest growing major economy expanded some 8.4%.
The United States economy grew at the amazing rate of 4.1%.
Hello, I like money.
Starting off in the 1820s with France at the top. Back then, both the UK and France were considered the most powerful nations on Earth, and even though the UK industrialized earlier and had better technologies, France's new era of stability after exiling Napoleon, combined with their diverse manufacturing and higher demographic size, put them ahead of the UK overall. It's important to note that a large part of what made these countries so rich in the first place was colonial trade with their colonies. Talking about trading with faraway places, the UK was the main importer and smuggler of opium into China. After the Chinese government tried to crack down on the opium abuse, it led to an opium war with the UK. The Opium Wars lasted from 1839 to 1842. After losing, China was forced to open all of their ports to international trade. The aftermaths of the war heavily weakened China's GDP, but still, due to its overwhelming population, it stayed on top of this list.
It's my turn! You told me it was my turn!
In the 1850s, following a huge population surge in the 40s and advancements in industrializations, the US overtakes both France and the UK as the second richest country in the world. But as we all know, Big Daddy Freedom was not gonna stop at number 2. While the US was experiencing an age of prosperity, China was doing the opposite. In the 1850s, China experienced the Second Opium War, this time against both the UK and France. Right after losing the war a second time, they also had to face many different rebel groups inside. These difficult times in China led to a stop in agriculture in the north. This in turn led to a famine that killed a lot of the northern population of China. Overall, China's GDP was weakening consistently. The results of this meant that in 1872, the US overtook China as the richest country in the world, and then just 2 years later, China's GDP fell so low even the UK was above it.
This is fine.
In 1871, Germany was united. This unification meant that everywhere in Germany they would use the same currency, and there were no more tariffs within the region. Easier trade combined with booming coal and steel production and a truly unified economy quickly boosted Germany up on this list, and by 1905 Germany was the richest country in Europe. In the 1890s and early 1900s, a man called Sergei Wittje introduced many major reforms to Russia. These reforms greatly boosted Russia's GDP and included things such as a currency reform, pegging the Russian ruble to the gold standard, a tax reform, state subsidies, tariffs, a state bank reform, railway construction, constructing the Trans-Siberian Railway, and so many more things. By 1985, Russia was very comfortable in the top 5 richest countries. And just when it started looking like Russia might become the second richest country in the world, war changed everything.
War never changes.
World War I was a devastating event for most of the world. But the winners didn't just leave with glory. The winners left with glory and a much higher GDP. Both the UK and the US's GDP doubled after the war. As people believed that World War I was the war to end all wars, a time of peace ensued. Countries rebuilt themselves, the economy grew back to earlier numbers, and consumerism was on the rise worldwide because everyone had spare change. But this was all pretty short-lived because in 1929 the Great Depression hit. First, the US stock market crashed, and the US took their money out of Europe in order to protect their own gold reserves. This in turn led to consumer panic and bank failures all over Europe. The Great Depression dropped the entire world's GDP by about 15%. This in turn led to more radicalized political views and people like Hitler getting into power. While the whole world struggled through the Great Depression, one country that focused on self-sufficiency was thriving. Following a revolution in 1917, Russia became the USSR, or the Soviet Union. In 1922, a man by the name of Joseph Stalin came to power. Stalin really wanted the Soviet Union to become self-sufficient and the most prosperous country on earth, which is why he launched his 5-year plan to make the Soviet Union an industrial superpower. Stalin really just focused on industrialization, putting other problems aside. While it was successful at turning the Soviet Union into an industrial superpower, it did so at a huge cost. Stalin was only able to achieve this by neglecting food supplies and using forced labor, inevitably leading to huge famines and the infamous Gulag system. If becoming the richest means killing millions of people, is it really worth it? Stalin's mismanagement of other sectors such as agriculture, combined with the fact that such a 5-year plan is just not sustainable in the long run, saw the Soviet Union's GDP quickly declining by 1936. Then from 1936 to 1938, Stalin initiated the Great Purge. During the purge, over 1 million people were executed and many more millions were sent to the gulags. The primary targets of this purge were political opponents, minorities, and intellectuals. But it also targeted skilled workers from failed businesses, because the blame usually fell on the workers instead of the leadership. His purge also targeted many other people as well, but when it comes to GDPs, it's clear to see why running a country without many educated people and the lack of skilled workers would lead to a much lower GDP. The Soviet Union's GDP dipped over 70%, making the US the new richest country in the world.
We are back, baby. We are fucking back. We're back. Classic.
Quick disclaimer, we're using the total GDP of countries as a way to measure how rich they are. This is generally what you'd do when comparing world economies, but it also means that it's very correlated to population size. If you're interested in seeing a video all about world population, you can check out our other videos linked in the description. Alright, back to the video. In 1939, Germany attacked Poland and initiated a new world war. The war was devastating and most of the world was going up in flames, with GDPs dropping left and right. But one nation managed to profit incredibly from this war, the US of A. By keeping out of the war for the most part, as none of the war was happening on its own land, and then being one of the deciding factors to end the war, the US managed to get out of the situation as the clear winner. Another winner of this war was the Soviet Union. While they did lose a lot of their GDP during the war due to their direct involvement with it, after the war they managed to get big territorial claims and many trade agreements with other countries in the east of Europe. But even so, the US's baby boom and golden age after the war kept it leagues ahead of any other country when it came to money. In the 1960s, Japan was going through an economic miracle. This miracle started when the Prime Minister Hayato Ikeda introduced his 10-year income doubling plan for Japan. His strategy focused on large-scale public investments into infrastructure like road, railways, and public housing, combined with tax cuts to boost consumer spending. All of this while also boosting foreign trade policies. Of course, this was not everything that boosted Japan's economy, but it was a big part of it. Following this, Japan became one of the largest exporters of electronic devices, cars, and ships worldwide. This also led the country to overtake Russia and become the second largest economy in the world. Similarly to Japan, another country that did really well at the time was Western Germany. On the other hand, East Germany, or the DDR, was doing incredibly bad. The poverty in East Germany and the direct contrast of their previous countrymen and neighbors doing so well led to large social unrest within the country, and in late 1989 the Berlin Wall fell, eventually leading to the reunification of Germany. Once reunited, it didn't take them too long to become the $3 trillion economy in the world.
Okay, let's go.
While the fall of the Berlin Wall was a tremendous achievement for Germany, it also signified the end of communist rule over Eastern Europe, effectively robbing the already declining Soviet Union of their biggest trade partners. Only 2 years later, due to rampant poverty and political unrest, the Soviet Union collapsed. Going into the 2000s, it really seemed like the US was unbeatable, but our old friend China had a different idea.
我在北京
In the year 2000, China pushed to improve their urban infrastructure and railway systems. Then in 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization. China reformed their banking system, started special economic zones, put a larger focus on exports, and much more. Say what you want about China, but their plan for economic growth was a really solid one, as they went from a GDP of about $800 billion in 2000 to a GDP of over $4 trillion in 2010. And just like that, China went from being a relatively poor nation to a serious contender for the throne. You've been watching this video for more than 10 minutes now. I hope you like it. And if you do, please leave a like and subscribe. We're still a really small channel, so any subscriber helps. If you look at these statistics right here, you can see that more than 99% of our viewers are not subscribed. Alright, thanks for subscribing and let's get back to the video. In direct contrast to China, Japan's GDP has not been growing since 1990, where it reached $3 trillion for the first time. Ever since, it's been hovering around the $3 trillion mark, sometimes going down as far as $2.4 trillion and other times going up to $3.7 trillion. Considering Japan's declining birth rate and their stance on immigration, it doesn't seem like they will ever grow past the $3 trillion mark.
This new virus.
Coronavirus.
We all know what happened in 2020. But funnily enough, because of record inflation, GDPs actually did not drop for the most part. Instead, they just started stagnating. Today, while it seems like we're still recovering from the shock of the pandemic, it turns out that in reality, GDPs have been growing all along, and it's just the people's lives that have become harder. Today, China is getting closer and closer to overtaking the US. And with recent developments and Donald Trump's more recent changes in legislation, it doesn't give me confidence that the US will be able to turn around and outgrow China. Another country that has been rising the ranks recently is India. Especially in the last few years, India has been doing incredibly well and has been growing at a really steady rate. While I don't believe India will overtake China or the US anytime soon, I do believe that this possibility exists. All we can do now is just wait and see. Anyway, while you're waiting for the newest statistics to come out, why not check out our channel and our other videos on there? We have previously covered population growth, military budgets, and greenhouse gas emissions. If any of that sounds interesting to you, feel free to subscribe and watch out for our newest videos coming soon. Have a good one and see you next time.